In this video, I really want to talk about 3 things that I avoid when fishing in cold water. We are here at the start of December, and really December, January, February, getting into March is some of the coldest water fishing months that you have throughout the entire year. Now, I know that some of you guys are iced up, and ice fishing is a completely different thing, something that I do not have a lot of knowledge about, but when it comes to open water fishing in cold water, that is what this video is, and there are 3 things that I really like to avoid because I know that it will help me to catch more bass. Now, before we get into the video, this one's brought to you by my apparel company, Finn Fishing. And right now through the month of December 2024, almost everything on the website is 20% off. There are a few items that are even 30% off. And everyone who buys something in the month of December, whether that's a USA made sun shirt, a bass hat, a pair of sun gloves, the all new duck shorts, whatever it may be, a t-shirt, all of you are going to be put into a drawing to win one of 4 different items. So I'm giving away 2 one-of-a-kind bass hats that are really unique. Also, I'm giving away an ARC Tharp Series grinder rod and an ARC G7 reel. This is my favorite bait caster that I've ever picked up. A great reel. And anyone who just simply buys something between now and the end of December, you're going to be put into a drawing to win one of these things. So I will kind of announce that in probably the first week of January. All right. Let's talk about things to avoid in cold water, because I do think that sometimes knowing where not to fish and what not to fish is just as important as knowing where to fish and what to fish. So anyways, let's talk about these 3 things. The first thing that I really try to avoid in cold water is muddy water. Muddy water, a couple of inches of visibility is not really that great to be fishing in cold water. And this is something that I think a lot of anglers already know. And honestly, I don't know the exact reason for it, because sometimes that muddy water in warmer water, I mean in the middle of summer or later spring, can be really good. And so I don't necessarily know why the bass don't seem to bite in it, but I know that over my many years of fishing, it has been the most difficult to try to catch a bass in cold muddy water. Now, there is a little bit of an exception to this, because what I define as colder water is typically anything below about 50 degrees. Muddy water that is, in the 40s, definitely in the 30s, is a no-go. But when you kind of hit that 50-degree mark, whether that is in the fall time or in the springtime, or maybe that's just where your water temperature gets to in the south, 50 degrees isn't the worst for muddy water, especially in the afternoon. A lot of times what I have found is that your water temps may be 49, 48, 50, 51 degrees in the morning, but if you have one of those days where it's pretty sunny and pretty still, that muddy water warms up substantially, and you will see fish that move up into this muddy water where, like, I remember a couple of years ago that I was fishing on a lake. Literally, I went there first thing in the morning. The water temp was 48. By the end of that day, it wasn't super warm out, but it was just super sunny. The water temp I got to 56. And by the end of that afternoon, there was a ton of bait fish that had moved up into these shallow water flat pockets, and there was a lot of bass in those areas. So when I say cold water, I'm really referring to anything kind of below 50s. There's definitely something to be said about muddy water in that 50-degree range. So it can actually be pretty good. All right, let's talk about the second thing to avoid in cold water, and that is lures that have a ton of vibration. Lures that have a ton of vibration and lures that have a ton of sound. These are pretty much, with the exception of one bait, and I'll talk about it here in a minute, these are pretty much not going to get you a lot of bites in cold water. Now, I'm not saying that you can't go out there and catch a fish in cold water on a bait that is super loud or has a lot of vibration. I'm just saying that typically other lures work a little bit better. And so sometimes it can be the difference between throwing a, for example, a swim bait that is a bigger bodied swim bait with a lot of kicking action and going down to a finesse bait. You're still throwing a swim bait, but simply going to one that has a little bit less action tends to outproduce the ones that have more action, that are more action, more vibration. And it just, look, this is, we talked about it a little bit before, but this really goes back to, you know, bass are cold-blooded. A lot of creatures are cold-blooded in the water. So as the water temperature falls, their metabolism falls, and they're not kind of actively moving or needing things as much. So sometimes those smaller lures, more subtle lures are going to outproduce pretty much everything that you have, especially those louder lures that have a lot of vibration. Now, like I said, there is one exception to this, and I honestly don't understand it at all, but I just know how good of a bait it is, and that is a blade bait. Now, I just talked about a blade bait a couple of days ago on a video, so I'm not going to go into length of it, but this is a bait that has a lot of vibration. When you pull it off the bottom, I mean, it has a lot of vibration, and I have caught some of the biggest fish in the coldest water on that one bait. And so that's the one bait to me that I know has an exception. I would love to know, maybe you guys have fished a bait that has a lot of vibration, and you fish it in 30-degree water, 38-degree water, or 45-degree water, and catch a lot of fish on it. Let me know down below in the comments if that has happened to you. All right, let's talk about the third thing to avoid in cold water, and that is flatter areas. I guess that's the best way to put it. Flatter areas, flat banks. Anytime that I fish in cold water, what I like to have more than almost anything is some sort of deep water access close by. If you go into those areas that are real, like sometimes you go into these pockets, maybe off of a main lake that they may only have 2 foot of water, 3 foot of water. They may have some really good looking cover in them, but they're just not that deep. Those areas can be really good when the water temperature like clicks up a few degrees and gets into the 50s and 60s, but when it's really cold in the 40s, those areas to me are just dead zones. And the biggest reason is that a bass likes that deep water close by. If a major cold front comes by and the water's already cold, you know, if a bass can just move down 5 or 6 feet in the water column and get to a little bit more comfortable zone, that is what it prefers to do, as opposed to being on top of a flat or on a really flat bank where they have to move 50, 60, 80, 100 feet, 200 yards to get to deeper water. So flat banks and flat areas, one, those are also really susceptible to weather, and two, I just do not find a lot of fish on those flatter zones. I like to have areas that have deep water access close by. And I'm not necessarily saying all shallow water, because again, you can have fish that are in shallow water, but they have deep water close by. I mean, think of a creek channel swing bank where the old creek channel hits the bank. You know, you might have 20 foot of water 5 foot off the bank. And so sometimes, even though it's really cold, you know, a bass may be in 2-3 foot of water, just below the surface really, but they'll be on one of those banks that has depth close by. They're not going to be in 2-3 foot of water on a giant flat. They just don't like to be able to swim that far to get to a comfort zone, if that makes sense. So those, to me, are the 3 big things that I like to avoid when I'm fishing in cold water. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out all those fin products, and I will see you guys tomorrow.